Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our next Senate Bill 671 work group. We have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Cherry, do you have any instructions for the work group members about how to comment?
Yes, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the SB 671 work group meeting. For participants joining us through GoToWebinar, please find the webinar panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you'll find the audio question and handout tabs. The meeting agenda is located under the handouts tab and can be downloaded and saved during the webinar. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These cannot be shared with other participants as they are registered to each specific attendee. There are two options for you to provide comments or feedback. The first option is to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. This will indicate to us that you wish to speak. At the appropriate time, at the end of each presentation, CTC staff will unmute you so that you can provide your comment. We ask that you state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. The other option is to use the questions tab. Click on questions and there will be a box to type in your comment. At the appropriate time after each presentation, CTC staff will read the comment on your behalf. Thank you for joining us today, and we appreciate you sharing your time and feedback with us.
Thanks, Cherry. So today what I wanted to walk through with everyone was the draft project request form. And as part of that form, there are also some CEQA related questions, and Cherry will go over those. Next slide, please. Okay, so probably a lot of you realize that the statute requires us to identify projects that would help meet the goals of the assessment. So on this slide, I've included a list of the kinds of projects that the statute specifically lists out. And so what we're planning to do is identify different projects in the report and then recommend funding for them, and also make recommendations about what might be needed for CEQA, and to the extent that we can, what might be needed for like electric system upgrades or things like that. So that's what we're working towards. Next slide, please. There's four main purposes for the form, and this is what we're trying to get at, or this is what our intention is for this form, and we're welcome to hear any feedback that you have. So we're trying to get information so that we can just meet the requirement in the bill. We're trying to have enough detail that we can be specific about the kinds of recommendations that we're making for each project. And we're also going to have CEC, CARB, CTC, and Caltrans staff review the projects so that we're all familiar with them. And that way, if we say recommend trade corridor funding for a project and you still need to compete via the regular trade corridor process, that at least we're familiar with this project. So the people that are likely to be you know, from the organizations that you'll be applying to for funding will have reviewed the project. Excuse me. That actually covers it. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so here's a look at the timeline, and I want to try to get the form out as soon as possible to give you as much time to work on your project recommendations as you can. And actually, let me take a moment and say, I haven't forgotten about all of the information that you all recently submitted in response to our information request. That was really great. It was super helpful, and I really appreciate it. We actually compiled it all into one document. We need to think about the best way to format that, and so at some point in the future, we will be coming back to you with to talk about what we learned and share information we think might be useful to the group. But we wanted to first talk about this form so that we could get it out to you as soon as possible because of the timeline we're on. So I want to send out the form no later than June 1st, earlier if I can, the final version. And then you'll have until September 1st to fill it out and send it back to us. Then we're gonna have a team look at it. The team I just mentioned, like the CTC, Caltrans, CARB, and the CEC, we'll have a team review the projects in September and October, and then we'll start incorporating any feedback we have after that, because we need to start transitioning near the end of this fiscal year to actually drafting the report. Our internal time frame work plan is to have a draft in July of 2023 so that the report can work its way through you all and through everyone else who needs to review it before we submit it to the legislature in December. So because of that, we want to make sure that we have the time to look at all the projects and give the best feedback that we can. And actually, I'll also take this opportunity to say that we don't plan to exclude any projects from the report. And by that, I mean that my plan is to include some summary level of information about every project that is submitted in an appendix, but we will go through an internal prioritization process. It's not like a formal scoring process like you would see for a grant, but it's just where we look at certain criteria, like how fast can this project be built? Where is it? Is it, and how, well, those are actually the two main criteria. The only other one is how well does it fit in with existing funding programs. So we're kind of trying to look at which ones can be built the fastest and where are the ones located in areas where we think that charging infrastructure is really needed, like near the maritime ports, for example. Because we know that the drayage truck roll is kicking in there pretty soon. So those are the kind of things we're going to look at. So we will try to kind of make tiers or priorities of projects in the report, but we're not necessarily going to exclude any of the projects in the report. And I just wanted to make that clear. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, you can keep going. Okay, so I'm going to go through this and I'll just cover a few slides and then I'll stop to see if anyone has any questions or comments. So the first section just lists out from the government code all the different types of projects that you can submit. And I will say that the focus of the assessment is on zero emission charging or refueling infrastructure. So that's the main type of projects that we want to focus on, but any of the projects in this list you can submit, you can nominate or submit a form for is what I mean. Okay, next slide. And then it's just who's recommending it and who will be responsible to implement it. It's fairly straightforward. Then we start with just trying to understand the location. So we ask you to provide a map, kind of give us a general description of the location. Make sure, is it on one of our SB 671 corridors that we identified before? The question about, is it within 500 feet of residential areas, schools, or parks is kind of getting at one of the CEQA type questions, trying to see if it might trigger a CEQA action. Okay, keep going. And then, is the site located within a tidelands area? And we give you a link to some information about that, because that can also include additional requirements if it is. Is it located in a Cal-Enviro's green community? The 60 or above is really easy to find out, and I think I include the link in the form, but if you go on the online map, the legend itself has the score based on census tract, and it will show by color what the score is, so it should be pretty easy to see. We're just trying to get a sense of what are the communities around it like? And then we ask about the space. I'll do one more slide and then I'll take any questions people have. Can you go to the next slide? We ask if there's space for people with disabilities, and if there's space to add additional capacity in the future if needed, which obviously it probably would be, but we just want to know if what kind of size, and you'll see some more capacity type questions later on, but we're trying to get a sense of the size and if there's a future opportunity to expand. But I'll stop there and take any questions that people have.
Hey, Hannah, so I don't see any questions in the questions box yet, and I don't see any hands raised at the moment.
Okay. Okay, go. So then we're still trying to just understand some of the characteristics of the site. Is it for public or private use or both? Is it an overnight charging location? Or is it a place where people are just going to be, stopping and then moving on, like opportunity charging? Will it be a 24-hour site? And so there's going to be customer service provided? Or if not, what are kind of the time windows that it will be open? And how is that customer service going to be provided? How many trucks per day? And this is trying to get a sense of like the capacity or how big it is. How many trucks per day will be served at this site? Or how many trucks is it designed to serve? And and this little question you see here in text, is it expected to change, is a little bit redundant of the previous question. We'll try to check the form for redundancy before we send it out. But sometimes we are asking kind of the same question in a little different ways. But the main question there is how many trucks per day will be served. Okay, next slide. So then this one is how many trucks can be served at one time, and then I'll look, because I need to take that second sentence out since it's a repeat. But how many trucks can be served at one time? How close is it to other zero emission infrastructure that could serve trucks? If there is another existing station around there. And is it already identified in any other planning documents? And I put a link to one there, the West Coast Collaborative Strategic Development document, because that identifies the whole list of sites in California. And I know that the CEC has funded some electric and hydrogen sites for freight as well, and those are already in planning. So we're just trying to get a sense of if it's near any other ones that are already there or planned. And then what local agencies have jurisdiction to approve and oversee the project? Have they been contacted, and have any concerns been identified? Because we know that building these sites is kind of a collaborative effort, and we want to make sure that we understand how like the MPO or local planning agency thinks about the project, how it fits in with what their plan is, and if they support the project. Next slide, please. Okay, and you'll have to bear with me 1 second because I have something that keeps blocking my screen. Okay, so then we have some hydrogen specific questions. And some of these, and I really appreciate, so the CEC, CARB, and Caltrans all helped put this form together. And we had some really great feedback from staff. And so some of these questions, the more specific ones, like what is the hydrogen fill rate and the fueling process, those are questions that the people who review the stations for standards have recommended that we collect at the beginning so that we kind of understand. But from what I understand, and I'm not the expert in this area, but my understanding is that these are actually standards that the design will require the site to be built to. But for example, with the fill rate, like 70 megapascals is faster than 35. So just kind of getting a sense of how fast it is or what it's designed to serve. So the other questions on this section are how many refueling dispensers will be there? The maximum number of trucks that can be charged or refilled at one time is redundant, so we'll have to take out that question. Does it contain light duty refueling, or does it have plans to put those in, or is it just going to be for freight? And then the more technical questions that I won't read verbatim. And then we ask you to describe the hydrogen distribution, and we're just trying to get a sense of how it's going to be delivered and if it's going to be going to the station in a pipe under the ground or in liquid form and on a truck. We're just trying to understand that more. Okay, next slide, and I think I'm going to stop here to take any. Okay, I'll run through the rest of these hydrogen specific questions and then I'll stop in case anyone has any comments. So in this next question, approximately how much hydrogen will be used? We're just trying to get a sense of what's the need, like for the amount of hydrogen. What if it was electricity, we would measure it in kilowatts. But for hydrogen, we're just trying to get a sense of how much hydrogen is going to be needed to support the dispensing station. And then describing the ramp up in utilization in the first 5 years. So how do we think that that's going to look? What do we think that the demand is going to look like? And then what's the carbon density? So I know that there's rules around this from CARB, but we're just trying to understand the plans for the site. Also, how much of that, so there's the question, how much of that renewable energy expressed as a % of total renewable energy will be sourced from direct renewable energy use as opposed to renewable energy credits? So this is trying to understand what your plan is so that we can understand how it fits in with CARB's current requirements. That's why we're asking that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so before we move on to the charging station specific questions, does anyone have questions on the hydrogen side?
So Hannah, I'm taking a look. We don't have any questions and we don't have any hands raised at the moment.
Okay. So for electric charging stations, we ask similar questions about how many charge ports will be on the site, what's the charging level, what's the distance between the electric panel and the charge like pedestal. And I guess that's an important thing to know. I'm still learning some of the technical aspects of these stations, but apparently that's something that is good to know at the beginning. Will vehicle to grid capabilities be included in the design? Like that is, I believe, giving power actually back instead of, like, if you want to, it's more like transferring a power back instead of getting it from. And then we just make a note, this isn't actually a question, but there's additional questions related to grid impacts later in the form. So people who are looking at this part don't just think that we're stopping here and these are all the questions we'll have. We just included that in a separate section. Okay, next slide. Okay, then we go on to, oh, does anyone have any questions about the electric charging stations before I move on?
I see no questions and no hands raised at the moment.
Okay. So then we move into understanding the operations. And so we're asking things like who's the landowner, who's going to own the infrastructure, how long is your contract, who's going to build it, who's going to operate and maintain it, is there going to be a site host fee, will the operator share revenues with the landowner? So just trying to understand the long-term operations and how's your relationship with the landowner going to look if you don't own the property, and how's that going to work? So that's what those questions are about. Next slide, please. And then we start getting into project schedules. This is actually fairly standard if you're used to submitting projects for a lot of our grant programs. We ask this kind of thing. So we're just asking about the estimated start and end dates of your phases. Next slide, please.
And it looks
And
like we do
funding.
have it looks like we do have one hand raised. Celeste,
Sure.
do you have a hand up?
Thanks, Sherry. Anthony Adams, you are unmuted.
Hi. So I'm curious, Hannah, what kind of timeline are you looking for projects? Are you looking for projects that are kind of already environmentally cleared, ones that are like 2 to 3 years out? Like, what is your optimal? Or are you looking for like a mix of them, and you want some short range and some long range? I'm just curious, kind of what's the target here?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Well, it's definitely not like trade corridors where we're really strict about saying that you already have to be through environmental and you have in it like we don't fund the PA and ED phase and you have deadlines for CEQA. It's definitely not like that. I think that what our goal for, and I would like to see a mix of long-term and short-term projects, because that's what would be best to have in our queue for trying to get funding for and things like that. But I think that ideally, what I really am hoping to see are projects that are ready to be built and like are ready to begin construction in the next year or two. Because, and the reason for that is not because they're inherently better than any other type of project, but only just because we just need the infrastructure so soon. But it doesn't have to be. So I hope that there are some projects that are fairly short term, like they'll begin construction in the next 2 or 3 years. But even if that's not the case, that's still okay, because at this point, we just need to look at good projects. So there's so many challenges we have, you know, finding space, making public charging stations, things like that, that it's mainly about just getting the projects out there and helping them be built as fast as possible. So we don't have restrictions on the time frame, but I do hope that we get some that are ready to start sooner rather than later.
Sure, Hannah. And if I could ask a follow-up question, I apologize. To that end, you know, some of these projects I would imagine are conceptual and maybe they have some buy-in. Maybe there's a property owner. Are you also, would this program possibly have funding for pre-environmental work, like PSR level work, where you would do that, you know, look for the items that might kill a project, or how much power you really need and what the cost really is, like really PSR, PES equivalent projects? Would you be looking to maybe fund some pre-environmental level work for some of these?
Yeah, we could do that. But you know, just to make sure that everyone on this call is clear about the fact that this assessment doesn't have any funding in and of its own self. Based on the projects that we identify, we're going to make recommendations. So we would say, for example, this is the kind of recommendations I'm hoping to make in the report, at least for the projects that we prioritize, because I don't know how many projects we're going to get. And I can't do this for like hundreds of projects, but for the ones that we prioritize, what I'm hoping to be able to provide is a recommendation about the funding program that they can apply to, like, oh, this one would be a great fit for the Carl Moyer program, or this would be a great fit for TSIP. So I recommend, you know, that those programs fund the project. That doesn't mean that they automatically get the funds. They still have to go through the competitive process. The statute actually says that it's not meant to preempt the competitive process of the grant programs. But I can recommend that those get funded. And then I was also hoping to say, Cherry's going to cover this, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but for CEQA, does this project fit within an existing categorical exemption? I hope to be able to provide some level of review to know that. Or is this a part of a set of projects that we want to request? We want to maybe do a programmatic EIR for this set of projects. And if we do that, we would have to ask in the assessment for money to hire someone or to have Caltrans staff or whoever to be the CEQA lead to do that programmatic EIR. And then what are the electric infrastructure upgrades that may be needed to support this project? I'm hoping to work with the utilities to have some sense of what will be needed. So those are the kind of questions that I'm hoping that we can answer for the main projects that we prioritize in the report. But they still are going to have to go through the regular funding programs. So we can definitely recommend funding for pre-environmental work, but it would have to be eligible under an existing funding program, or we would have to make a specific ask in the report to fund that kind of work for like a certain project or group of projects. And that would have to get approved through like the regular budget process. Does that make sense?
Very much so. I really appreciate the comments. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a couple of other hands raised. Celeste?
Yeah. Kathleen Hanley, you are unmuted.
Hi, this is actually Rick Carter with Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. Kathleen was put on this panel originally and she's left the organization, so I'm filling in. And apologize if this question's sort of been covered before because this is the first meeting I've been able to attend. But when I'm looking at the questionnaire that's here, it seems very much structured to projects where the site's basically been identified and the project's sort of been designed. And I think as Hannah alluded to, you guys like projects that are ready for construction. I'm thinking of what we've got going on in Placer County. There's an interchange location where we have a desire to put in charging, but there's multiple sites that are potential. We certainly haven't got into the detail that's here. And so in relation to the comments that came immediately before me, I'm wondering if you would consider structuring something where you've got different levels in terms of you've got a project that's largely been designed and you can identify the number of charging stations and what the relationship is with the project owner, but perhaps another form or some method for conceptual projects, known needs and desires, but there certainly hasn't been that level of work to be done. We'd be looking to get funding to help. As the previous commenter made, in terms of like PSR studies and that sort of thing. So I think that's my comment.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I'm glad you said that because what I was going to tell the work group this is my idea, was to have you just fill out as much as you can. So, for example, if you know the location where you want to build the project, but you don't necessarily know yet how many dispensers you're going to have there, or charging stations, or you don't know some of the details that we're asking for, I would just say that you don't have that information yet. And then whatever level of information that you provide, we'll assess it based on that detail. Would that work?
Yeah, I think so. Perhaps a little bit of maybe a narrative section up front. So like the project that I have in mind, we can describe that, at this point it's a concept. We think that it's an ideal location, but there's multiple sites and some sort of
Okay.
narrative description.
Maybe I'll add a question like that near the beginning, like if this, if this site is still in a more conceptual stage, then please describe your idea for the site or something like that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, because otherwise I think somebody's going to look at the form and go through and like they have no idea what they're doing, which is correct, because we don't know the number of chargers or fueling stations, or the truck volume. Certainly some of that we should be able to estimate, but there'll be a lot of unknowns, and so at least having a description saying that it's at this point it's a concept, and at this point the funding need is to advance the project to solidify the site and answer a lot of the questions that are essentially on the form.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. I'll add that in.
Thank you.
We have one more hand raised. Celeste, do you want to unmute them?
Yes, sorry, I was talking, thinking I was unmuted. Melody Black, you are unmuted.
Great, thank you. Just a clarification question, and I apologize, I've not been as engaged in some of the earlier discussions, so perhaps this is obvious. But on the objective for the form, are you really trying to better understand, since it's not a form where you're soliciting funding, such as a grant or what have you? Is it really more to find information on projects that are expected to go in within certain areas and locations and certain types of projects? So you're looking for a overview of everything, or really more of an effort to try and link certain projects that are coming up with funding opportunities in other areas, or something completely different?
No, good question. It's the second thing you said. So we're trying to link projects with funding, because ultimately the bottom line is we're just trying to help get these projects built. Because right now there's such a need for a zero emission infrastructure for freight. I think everyone understands that, and we're trying to use this report to do a couple of things. I would say 3 major things. Like the report in total, we're trying to, 1, help educate people, not in a condescending way, but like in a helpful way. Help educate decision makers, help identify barriers or challenges and maybe possible ideas for how we might want to address those, just about the transition to zero emission in general, and then help get these projects built. So we want to be able to provide good feedback to you on, is there anything we can do to make CEQA easier or faster? Do we want for a certain set of projects to request because you have to request via statute a new categorical exemption or something. That's just an idea that OPR had. Or, what kind of funding programs can we, if we could fund these projects directly, that would be great. But since we can't do that, we want to recommend them for funding programs.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All
Looks
right,
like
Hannah,
that's
that's it for the raised hands.
Okay. Did you say you did? You said you didn't see any, right? Okay,
Correct.
we can keep going. Okay. So for funding, what you're seeing on the screen right now is pretty normal in terms of what we ask for in funding for most projects that at least the commission funds. But where it gets a little different is in the ongoing costs. We don't normally ask about those, but we're asking about what the ongoing costs are. And that's more so we can understand, because the ongoing costs, we want to, for one thing, know that there's a way to pay for them, which I assume there would be, otherwise there probably wouldn't be much point in building the station. But just so that we know that there's a way to pay for the ongoing costs, and also that so that we can understand how how it's going to work, because this is a new kind of deal. So it's actually just helpful to understand how this is planned to move forward. Okay, next slide, please. And then we ask some specific hydrogen questions. We can keep going. Here's some more questions about the estimated energy rate, the estimated monthly demand charges, or any other kinds of costs. If you don't know the answer to this, you don't have to submit it, but if you have any kind of idea, it would be good to try to capture what these costs are. We can keep going. And then we ask about how the site owner or operator intends to use LCFS credits, user fees, or other things to support. So we're trying to, again, understand how the site will be funded on an ongoing basis. And I think if I was trying to fill this out, it would even just be helpful to think about these things, to think these things through, almost like just from a planning perspective, but we're trying to understand how these will work. Okay, next slide, please. And then we have a section on, oh, I'm sorry, before I move on to grid impacts, does anyone have any questions on the funding part, the slides we just covered?
Hey, Hannah, there's no hands raised. Cherry, if there's any questions or anything.
There are no questions either.
Okay, great. Then we're trying to understand grid impacts, especially for the charging stations. So we actually provide a map of the investor-owned utilities and publicly owned utilities or non-investor-owned utilities, so that you can see, or we provide a link to one, so that you guys can see where your project is situated. And we also provide some links. The one I sent you this morning only had the SDG&E tool, but there's also one from SCE that I just got. And I don't know if PG&E has one, but I think they probably do have a tool that you can use to, it's for people who are interested in building a station. They can go and online and look at a map and kind of get a sense of what the electric infrastructure around there looks like. And also we've talked to the utility companies and they've been really helpful. And we will, to the extent that people are comfortable with, we will pass along information about projects that we get to them and ask if they can help us understand the infrastructure upgrades that might be needed to support the project. So we're going to try to do what work we can in that area to understand that. But these are questions we're asking you to get a better idea of what might be needed. The CEC has some great maps. We have a link to one that shows where substations are. So you can see how far away is your project from a substation, things like that. Okay, next slide, please. And then we're asking about the level of power that will be needed at the site. If you know if any upgrades will be needed, and if yes, to describe them. Is there access to three-phase power? Will the site use the microgrid or battery storage or solar panels? So just trying to understand the energy management at the site. And if any load management techniques will be used, what are they? So how are you going to manage that energy? We're just trying to understand that better. Next slide. Okay, so we can go back to the energy one. Does anyone have any questions about the grid impacts section?
Hey, Hannah, I'm not seeing any hands raised. Cherry, are there any?
I don't see any written questions either.
Okay. Then there's only one more slide before we go into the SQL part, and Sherry's going to be talking about that. So then there's, we're also asking, to the extent that you know, this is not something that you have to have the answer for, but it's something that we are asking you to provide if you have this information. Do you know of any specific barriers or risks that could impact the project? And do you have any proposed solutions for those? If you just have the barrier and you don't know what the solution is, that's okay too. But if you know about anything like that that we should be aware of, then please let us know. Methods to avoid displacement. I mean, in general, it's a good idea to think about that and try to avoid displacing residents and businesses. But also it's a requirement in the bill that we consider that and provide best practices for doing that. So actually that's something we're working with Caltrans on, is to provide information about how to do that or best practices for that in the report itself. We're actually collecting that information now, but we're just asking you to think about it for your project. And then any benefits that you know of for like trade corridor projects, if you're going to apply for that funding, you actually are required to provide a set of benefits, like in air quality and safety and economic benefits are some of the required metrics. But if you know what any of the benefits of your project are, then please provide that. And then about the EVSP information, I think actually instead of asking those questions, what we're going to do is ask you to kind of connect with another project, and I can't remember the name of that offhand, so I'll just add it to the form, but it's going to be just one question. So that ends that section, and I want to give Cherry a chance to cover the CEQA part. Are there any questions on this information?
I don't see any written questions. And Celeste?
No hands raised either.
Okay. So I'm going to let Cherry cover the rest. Just so you know, Cherry Zamora and Ken Lopez have both joined my team to help me with trade corridors and the freight data stuff we work on, and Senate Bill 671. They've both been doing a great job. Ken is a research data specialist, and Cherry is a planner. She has a background in CEQA. She used to be a CEQA consultant. So she's much more knowledgeable than I am about CEQA. So Cherry, do you want to go over the CEQA part?
Sure. Okay, so I'm just going to go over the CEQA request worksheet that's going to be part of the overall project request. And just to start off with, we have talked to Caltrans environmental staff and to the Office of Planning and Research as well. And our takeaway was that it would be best to see the specifics of the projects first, and then from there decide which projects might fit under an existing categorical exemption, or seeing how it all shakes out if there are sets of projects where it makes sense to do a programmatic EIR, or if there's a group or groups of projects where it makes sense to even recommend a bill requesting a new categorical exemption in the guidelines. So that's kind of where we're coming from. And I'm just going to go over the questions on the worksheet. So this first question is, what are the physical aspects of the project? As you can see to the right, we have some check boxes for you to consider, including ground disturbance, new or replaced pipelines, whether or not the project modifies an existing facility, or if it results in a new facility, if it's some type of on-road demonstration, or if your project includes EV infrastructure or electrical infrastructure. If you have a site layout or exhibit showing the project, that's definitely helpful. So please go ahead and attach that plan sheet or site layout to your response. And this next slide is just a continuation of question 1. Again, you can check the appropriate box next to solar component whether or not your project includes hydrogen fueling infrastructure, if it involves a paper study or lab research, if it involves temporary or mobile structures, or design/planning, or anything that we might not have covered. Question 2 is pretty straightforward. Where is your project located? If you have an address, go ahead and fill it in. But if you have kind of an alternative way that might be a better way to identify the location, like say a latitude, longitude coordinate, or post miles on a freeway, feel free to put that in. We also ask that you identify if the project involves work within Caltrans right away. Question 3 digs in a little deeper. Hopefully you'll know or have an idea of any challenging environmental aspects of your project. Has the site been disturbed previously? Do you know if the site is environmentally sensitive? For example, are there listed species habitat at the site? Or is the project site on agricultural land? Perhaps there might be some issues or challenges regarding getting mitigation in that respect. So those are the kinds of things you want to think about. Again, is there public controversy? Think about the surrounding land uses and what entities might be involved. You might want to ask yourself, or you should ask yourself, what sort of right-of-way acquisitions would be needed? And are there historic resources that could be impacted? For instance, is the project site near areas known to have cultural resources, such as archaeological sites, or is it near a historic district? And this slide just kind of continues. Question 3, is the project site located on a site affected by hazardous waste or required cleanup? Will your project generate noise or odors in excess of permitted levels? Or will the project potentially increase traffic at the site? So let's say if it's at an existing truck stop area or existing industrial commercial land uses, and you're proposing, a charging station or some sort of facility, it might not be as big of an impact if you're already in those types of industrial commercial land uses. But if it's at an undeveloped site, you might want to think about, how that would potentially reroute traffic and how that would differ from the current setting. And this last one is sort of a catch-all of any topics we missed. We mentioned air quality, aesthetics, water quality, but if there's anything you can think of, provide it here. Many of you are probably familiar with key environmental topics that come up in your particular location or your project type. So this is a place to include that if it's not captured elsewhere in the questionnaire. And question 4 is about permits. Go ahead and check any boxes that are applicable to your project. Caltrans encroachment permit, air quality, water quality permits, any conditional use permits if your project requires some sort of land use conditions attached to it. A building expansion permit, hazardous waste, rezoning, any authority to construct, or anything else that might be needed for your project. Then question 5 is about the CEQA lead agency. Have you identified and contacted the agency who will be the CEQA lead agency? Typically, this might be the agency with local governmental powers, so it could be your local city or county where your project is located. Or if you're a state or a regional agency, it may be you as a CEQA lead, but in partnership with local entities as responsible agencies. And question 6 basically asks, if you have already kind of started the CEQA process, to provide us sort of the milestones that you've hit or what you plan to do. So this table to the right, you'll put in an answer, again, for any milestones that have already been achieved, or if you have planned completion dates for them. As you can see, you can fill out if you've already prepared an initial study or EIR or any sort of NEPA document if applicable. And then question 7 is really just a leads off from question 6. If you have not started CEQA yet, just go ahead and explain why here and where you're at in the process. Perhaps you are still in preliminary phases, or perhaps your project might be still very conceptual. Let us know. Just let us know, and then include your estimated approval date or how long you anticipate it would take to complete the environmental process, CEQA/NEPA. And I think that's actually my last slide. So if there are any questions, please feel free to pop in a question in the questions box or raise your hand. And we actually have a written question from James Schenkel. He says, appears comparable to the CEQA checklist. What about NEPA? If federal dollars involved would be anticipated, NEPA would be triggered. Who would vet? Who would not the CEQA lead agency have to confirm all the CEQA checklist information? You're right, James. If there is some sort of federal funding, you would have that federal nexus. And that's a good point. We could probably kind of make some modifications to these questions so that it addresses a little bit more NEPA type stuff, if NEPA focused questions, in addition to the CEQA checklist questions that we have here currently. Thanks for that comment. And I don't see any hands raised. Oh, okay. So it looks like Scott Strelecki also provided a written question. I didn't see where the CEQA request worksheet is. Was it provided yet? So Scott, it has not been provided yet. Right now, all you see is what's in the PowerPoint is basically what's in the draft request worksheet. We will be providing the worksheet shortly after, we incorporate some of these comments, like the one James just provided.
Yeah, that's right, Cherry. And I think we're going to try to put these in the project request form, so it's all in one spot. So what my plan is Cherry's going to finish the CEQA part of the form, and then I'm going to incorporate the feedback I heard today about putting a more narrative type question at the beginning. And then I'm going to make it clear that if you don't have an answer to one of the questions, you should still fill out the form and answer what you can. So I'll add that into the beginning, and then I'll make sure that there's not redundant questions. And so after we do those things, then we'll send the form back out to the work group. And do you think that would you like me to give you a little bit more time to review it and provide comments at that point? What do people think about that?
I don't see any hands raised.
I think that's what I'll do, but I just won't give people very much time because, like I said, I want to send out the final version by June 1st because I really want people to have those 3 months to work on this. Because I feel like it's important that they have as much time as possible because of the amount of information we're asking them for. And I can't really I know on like the information request and the corridor nominations, I was able to give people additional time. But for the project request form, I don't know if that's going to be possible, only because we're kind of getting close, you know, we need to have all of the projects at the same time so that we can review them all together. And so I'm not really, it's going to be much harder to give people additional time after September to submit project requests. So I'll incorporate those edits and we'll send the form back out, but we'll ask for any additional feedback fairly quickly so that we can get the final draft out by June 1st. Sorry, Jerry, go ahead.
It looks like we do have one hand raised. Celeste?
Yeah, Ambar Rivera, you are unmuted.
Hi, thank you. So I just wanted to voice that folks that are going to be identifying some of this infrastructure. My goal is some element of community engagement. I appreciate that you mentioned avoiding displacement and using buffer 500 feet. But it would be great if we can some curriculum outreach for those communities that are going to be facing this infrastructure and charging stations.
Actually, can you, sorry, but I can't actually hear what you're saying. There's a lot of really bad background noise and I can't hear. Can you type your question in the chat?
Will do.
Cherry, Celeste, can you guys understand what they're saying?
No, it was very staticky, unfortunately. But she said she would enter something in the chat.
Okay, perfect.
I don't see anything yet. And no additional hands raised at the moment. Oh, here we go. So Amber Rivera's written question is, it would be great for folks to do some community outreach when identifying some of these charging infrastructures.
Okay. We'll incorporate a question about that into the form. Thank you. Okay, well, with that, we have 1 minute left, so I just want to thank everyone again for your time and participation in this process. And please reach out to me if you have any questions or comments that come up in between our meetings. And if there are no other questions or comments, then we thank you for your time and we'll see you at the next meeting. And Cherry and Celeste, do you see any other questions or hands raised?
No hands raised and no additional written questions. And it looks like everybody is logging off.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can hang out for a couple of minutes in case anyone has anything, and then we'll just, you can end the webinar.
Okay.
Go ahead and end it, guys.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you both.
You're welcome. Bye.